was just a tremendous need in the assisted living space that really wasn't being filled properly. Affordability. There's been almost no development in the past 5 years. All the numbers worked out perfectly, and then you go there and you're like, I get why this property is not doing well. 100-bed assisted living facility, you might have 45, 50 employees. That level of arrogance is what gets people into a lot of trouble. We are not just hearing about things, but that we're actually seeing them with our own eyes. This should not seem like this is the end of my life. It should feel like a place that you're excited to go.
From closing deals to opening minds, this is the Mr. D podcast. I'm Omar Andreasen, and we're about to get real about real estate, success, and the grit that it takes to build your best life. Let's dive on in. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Mr. Deed podcast show. Today I'm happy to have Mr. Doug Halperin. He's actually the principal at Elevated Estates, a Florida-based operator specializing in the middle market assisting living facilities. Since co-founding the company in early 2022, Doug is actually focused on providing high-quality care at affordable prices for residents who need more than independent living, but can't afford those premium tier facilities. Doug, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I think this episode will definitely connect with a lot of our listeners out there, especially when it comes closer to taking care of that parent, or maybe they have that parent already in an assisted facility, but probably need a little bit more expertise. And this is where hopefully you can come in and help.
Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
Awesome, man. So let's talk about this journey that you went on. What specifically sparked you to kind of go down this trajectory of assisted living?
So, I've been passionate about real estate for a long time, and I've always really enjoyed working on the entrepreneurial aspect of real estate and turning properties around and sort of re-envisioning what they can be from where they currently are.
Mhm.
And when we went out to start this platform, we were focused on looking at both multifamily and assisted living assets. Myself and my partner both had extensive experience in both areas, and we really find that there was just a tremendous need in the assisted living space that really wasn't being filled properly. And we thought that we could really do a great job and really provide a lot of value add for properties, a lot of value add for residents. And there was a lot to be provided to this new arena.
Love that. Let's talk about the middle market opportunity. So, as I said before, almost anybody that knows about this space knows that it's not a cheap space whatsoever. Why is the affordable senior care tier so undeserved, and how does this create a unique opening for the middle market operators?
I mean, I think that it's really just what are the issues that every person is facing, right? Affordability. That's the word that every single politician keeps on using, and there's a reason why that keeps being done. So the same problems that people face when they're going to the grocery store, the same things that people face when they're going to buy a home or rent an apartment or wherever that may be, right? All of those things are the same issues that would face assisted living. And so, trying to provide high quality care, which, right, thankfully, this has been good for a lot of people, right? Wages have increased, but along with that, right, food costs have increased, right? Utility costs have increased, all of these things. And so when you have so many of those, cost drivers are going up, and you're trying to provide an affordable experience for people that are not having incomes that can really rise, right? A lot of people in this market are on fixed budgets. They've got, maybe they've got pensions, Social Security, whatever that might be, but they're typically obviously not going to be working and not going to be bringing in more money based on, a number of economic factors. And they're sort of, on a fixed, this is my budget per month. And so all of those things have really impacted the entire assisted living space immensely, to the point where there's been almost no development in the past 5 years, simply because of the cost of construction in relation to what assisted living is able to bring in.
So do you look at maybe finding land and then helping a developer, maybe you guys develop it, or do you find one that is maybe not doing so well and you identify it and you say, okay, you know what, this is how we can improve it, and we have investors to do it, or maybe it's something that you tackle yourself?
So I mean, we have not done ground up development. What we really look to try and find are properties that are misaligned, whether that's the occupancy is low, the expenses are too high, a lot of CapEx is needed, whatever that may be, many times a combination of all three factors. But for whatever reason, the property is not performing in the way it should, and also not providing usually the care to residents that it can. And then we look to, bring in our best practices from management and things like that and sort of overhaul the operations. Again, provide a cash infusion and update the amenities, update room interiors, things like that, and provide a great experience for the residents, as well as obviously looking toward the investment side for ourselves also.
So what is that tall tale sign? What is it when you guys are sitting and you're looking at these opportunities? Is it something maybe that you, as you drive by, you're like, you know what? I can tell they're not taking care of that facility that well. Is it word of mouth? What is it that you guys say, okay, you know what? This opportunity has been presented to us, or this is how we identify that opportunity to go in there and improve it?
A lot of it is, different areas of word of mouth, right? Finding out about different opportunities and things like that. And then it's, going through all this sort of normal real estate procedures, right? Underwriting what the property is going to look like, what are the costs going to be, what is the revenue, all of those sort of aspects. But what I always find with real estate is that you have to be in physical presence of the property to truly understand it, right? I've done a number of different deals where it's like, look, all the numbers worked out perfectly, everything looked incredible, and then like you go there and you're like, I get why this property is not doing well, right? I get why these comps that I thought were the same from this property a quarter mile away, actually this market's completely different, right? Whatever that might be. And so, one of the things I love about real estate is that you can touch it, you can feel it, you can see it, and I think that is, incredibly important in all areas of real estate to understand what that actual location looks like and what it can be.
You done your numbers, you touched it, you looked at the property, and the numbers make sense. But then now it comes from an operation standpoint. Now, when you guys come in, it might be that you say, okay, well, the property is not probably making as enough ROI because maybe there's too many employees. Maybe they're not charging enough. I mean, when it comes to that mindset and that part of the operations, can you dive in a little bit into that and kind of tell us what does that look like?
Sure, absolutely. So it's getting into the nitty-gritty. It's understanding how everything is done, right? How many employees are on a floor, how they're being scheduled, how overtime is being handled, right? How the operational components, right? The example I always give is, right, if you have a 100-unit multifamily property, maybe you've got 3 employees, right? You've probably got like a property manager, maybe an assistant, and a maintenance manager, something along those lines. 100-bed assisted living facility, you might have 45, 50 employees. So it's a completely different kind of ecosystem that you're sort of dealing with and understanding what that means. So a lot of times we are looking to drill down on what was the previous operator doing well and perhaps more importantly, what were they not doing well, right? What are areas that we feel like what are the different levers that we can pull on the revenue side? What are the different levers that we can pull on the expense side? Because I think that you have to have humility in this business and understand that whoever was there before you is probably pretty smart, is probably pretty driven, and definitely wanted to make more money. And so to come in and say, like, hey, we're just going to do so much better because we're just so much smarter than everybody else, I think that level of arrogance is what gets people into a lot of trouble. And so you have to have that humility to understand, like, I'm going to try and look at this in a different way. But the person here before me was trying to make this work successfully. And what can I do to change that if I'm going to take this over? And sometimes it's they were actually doing a really good job and we really can't change it. And so this might be something that we're not going to be able to, work on.
Would you say that as you're looking through this process and as you've been doing this as a business now for a couple of years, would you say, you know what, there's a sweet spot? And what I mean by that is like what we try to look for is a sweet spot of at least 20 to 50 units where we know within that 20 to 50 unit or that sweet spot is the best ROI for us and our investors. Would you say that there's a sweet spot that you guys are looking for?
Absolutely. I mean, this is commercial investing,
Mm.
right? A lot of there are tons of assisted living facilities across the US and they range in how big they are from places that are like 3 beds to places that are, 1,000 beds that are, crossing over independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, right? Sort of the whole continuum. And so a lot of those smaller properties are run like sometimes even inside someone's home, possibly like a retired nurse or a pharmacist or something like that. And so we definitely need and want to have the kind of scale where we can provide the right levels of care, the right kind of staff, while obviously still running a business. And so we find that we're typically looking for properties that are like 60 to 200 beds, sort of that kind of realm is where our major focus is.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I never knew there were a facility with like 3 beds. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's really just like single family homes
Mm-hmm.
that have, 4 bedrooms, and the administrator is also the owner, is also the person who's, helping out on care. And there's three, they might even be living there sometimes, right? And then there's, three,
Mm.
4 bedrooms. They have maybe they're a couple are doubled up. And you have 6 residents, and for someone with that sort of focus, it's a very nice business and a nice way to, again, also take care of people, which is obviously, a big part of the mission-driven aspect of what assisted living is.
So that brings up a question for me then. Does that person that has, let's say, something that small, does your licensing and everything you have to do is still the same, whether it's a 3 bed or a 2,000 unit? You still got to go
Yes,
through the same procedures?
it almost everything is basically exactly the same, and that has at different times made things difficult, especially on smaller places.
Hmm.
After 2018, there was during one of the hurricanes in South Florida. It was incredibly unfortunate, and 3 people passed away. And so the state of Florida passed legislation where every assisted living facility had to have a generator, where they would be able to provide, energy for the building for at least a few days until, things could be turned over. And so a lot of times for when you're running properties that don't have huge margins, right? And that's a lot of times what people don't understand is it's not this is not a business where there's such a big margin that these kind of impacts can just be absorbed very easily. There were definitely places that had to pivot or even close down because they couldn't absorb those kind of additional costs.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that, yeah, that's what hurricane was that? 2018. Was that Milton? No.
I can't remember which one it was, but this is, this is
Oh,
like 7 years ago.
yeah. When they put that law into action, that pretty much then it kind of killed all those smaller businesses per se, and then the bigger fish then were like, okay, then those people had the force to, I guess, how did it affect it? Because now I'm thinking, I'm assuming that if you're a smaller business like that, then you probably are not paying as much, or are you? Is it apples to apples comparison?
The pricing is not always indicative of
Hmm.
of what that is, right? Just like, imagine that you walk into a single family home that's
Yeah.
worth $10 million, and imagine that you walk into an apartment that's being rented for $800, right?
Hmm.
The single family home is obviously going to be a lot nicer, right? So
Better be.
there's definitely a lot of sort of variations in that way. Typically, though, the higher end places are all going to be sort of, bigger properties where there's, 40, 50, 100, 200 beds, things like that. But also the generator size, right? A lot of those impacts are always going to be different. So if you need a generator for a 2,000 square foot home, or you need a generator for an 80,000 square foot building, those are going to be two very different costs. And so, I think that these are all things, obviously, in different ways, can sort of get passed on to consumers, but also it's not things that they're really benefiting from, right? It's not something where, right, people are just expecting. Right? It's like, if your elevator breaks down and you're like, okay, I need to fix it and I'm going to spend $50,000 on this. No one's paying more money for you that you have a working elevator, right? Everyone was just
Mm.
sort of assuming you would have a working elevator. And so a lot of times these kind of expenses are the same way, which is you're putting money into your property, but it's not necessarily providing an ROI in terms of higher rents or anything like that.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I was just something I just can't, you just thought about, like, man, but it makes sense how you explained it. So a lot of times when it comes to the assisted living part, so I want to talk more about you being like the boots on the ground operator. And obviously you hear horror stories about when it comes to the medical staff not necessarily treating the patient the way they should be, or and then of course the family members getting upset. How is it that you being local and being the boots on the ground, how do you maintain that high level of transparency when it comes to something like that?
Well, so first of all, I think that one of the big distinctions there also just quickly make is assisted living is very different than like skilled nursing. Right? Skilled nursing, you are for sort of closer to what we would sort of colloquially call a patient.
Mm.
Assisted living is in many ways closer to independent living, where we have residents that are sort of
Mm.
sharing kind of home health aid type services. But I think that what we're talking about in terms of boots on the ground, that's really what it is. It's that we have people on at a high level within our company that are not sitting in an office all the time, never visiting the properties. And that's a lot of times what I've actually seen from properties that we've taken over is, it's an out of state operator with, no one there has visited in 6 months, in 12 months, whatever it might be. Maybe there's even a third party manager in place, and even the higher ups at the management company aren't coming to visit. So, we really want to be very present. We want to, ensure that we are not just like, hearing about things, but that we're actually seeing them with our own eyes. And so, we're very visible at the property, and want to make sure that that's really where we can make sure that that level of care, that sort of quality assurance is always being delivered. But all these things really start with the employees and making sure that they're happy, that they're excited to come to work, and that they are also into this mission and have that buy-in, because ultimately that's going to resonate with making happier residents, and happier everyone that comes to the property, right? Those employees are going to is going to be what's driving that sort of feature.
Okay. So I guess I've been reading and then they call it, I thought it was funny when they said this, but the silver tsunami. So with that approaching, what do you think is, maybe I would say, one of the fundamental shifts in senior housing, maybe that investors must really prepare for today, in your opinion?
I mean, so, the silver tsunami, it's been talked about at like every assisted living conference for the last like 5 years, right? And I always thought what was funny is, right, a tsunami is sort of this sudden wave. And I always thought it was a bad, like, and I would talk about it with colleagues, people in different spaces, and I'll be like, I find it hard to believe that, like, because 2026 was sort of that moment that everyone had been dreamt. It was like, so it's like December 31st, everyone's sort of staying at home, and then January 1st, 2026, 2 million people are showing up at the doors of ALFs across the country being like, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. And so I think it's actually more like the demographic trends in assisted living and senior housing are 100% there, right? People are that generation is very big. They're getting older, and thankfully also, right, everyone's living a lot longer and a lot healthier, which is really great. And so I think it's, certainly preparing for those dynamics, but understanding that it's not happening all at once, and also that people's needs and the way they connect are changing, right? Technology, all of these things that are impacting everyone else's life are also going to be impacting, senior housing. But in terms of this, major demographic idea, and this is something I mentioned earlier, one thing is there really has been very little development in the senior housing space. And so it will be interesting to see how that is impacted with, bringing more people into the fold, as well as potentially starting that development pipeline at some point down the road.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think ultimately it boils down to cost. Construction costs have risen tremendously, and so in order to make that work and spend all of that money on the land, spend all that money on the construction, and then once you start an assisted living property, right? When you have like a retail property or multifamily, right? There's one resident, there's one tenant, like that's okay. When you have it, when you start assisted living, if there's two tenants in the building, you still have to have administrators, care staff, chefs, activity directors, right? All of those things still have to be provided for. And so there's a lot of cost in sort of opening them. And so I think because of all those reasons, it's just been very difficult from a business scenario to actually work in all this development. And so there's been very little that's transpired over the last like 5, 6 years between, again, like those costs, interest rates, right? All the things that are just impacting all the others in real estate, but the other costs that might not, like food costs and wage increases and those kind of things that have impacted it more, have sort of had this, additional impact in the senior living space.
You mentioned something about technology. In your opinion, as far as when it comes to the integration of technology and care change, what do you see there? Do you see maybe more value, maybe more operated assisted living assets over the next decade, or where do you see technology kind of working with the assisted living space?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of companies that are trying to get into this space in all different aspects, right? Whether that's on the marketing side and digital marketing and AI and those sort of things. It's on the tech space, and some of it's on safety, some of it's on, creating ways for people to communicate better, right? And there's just like so many different scenarios where this is playing out. I
Mm.
think definitely on the communication side, right? One thing that people really don't want to feel, and they shouldn't, is that they're sort of like, pushing a loved one into this scenario that you see in a movie where it's like, you drop them off to never see them again. And number one, that's sort of a very media driven approach, which is assisted living is it's very like social. That's sort of the idea, is that you're coming out of your home where now you're going to be around a lot of like-minded people and able to do activities and socialize and eat together and all sort of those great things. But at the same time, obviously, with increased technology, it allows for residents to communicate more with family and be able to, have that process be a bit more seamless than maybe it was in the past.
When you said that, I don't know, have you ever watched the TV series Landman?
I've seen clips. I have not watched the show. I've heard it's great.
There's an episode there where the wife goes in and the daughter they go into an assisted living and they walk in like, man, like it's so boring in here. And the nurse is being like, yeah, I think. And then if I can recall correctly, one of them said, yeah, we come here to die. She goes, nah, we're gonna start living. So they pretty much like take him out to like strip clubs and they take him out to bars and they do like activities to get him out there. So when you were talking about that, I was thinking. First, I thought about Cocoon, the movie, when I saw when I was a kid, where they were kind of partying up,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden Landman hits. I'm like, oh, wait, I remember that one episode that the wife and daughter went in there and they started showing them a good time, you know. But that's what just came to mind when you were
No,
talking
but
about
and
that.
and
Yeah.
it's again, like I think that definitely tilts more toward when people think of either skilled nursing or even obviously like things like hospice or going to a hospital. But that was one thing with one of our properties in Brooksville, that we saw this asset, and this is like re-envisioning, right? It did kind of have that, it hadn't been renovated in 50 years. It did sort of look like a hospital. There were even a lot of people that, were in those kind of beds and things like that. And so like that was our goal. We came in, new floors, new paint, new roof, new windows, like across the board, whole scale renovation into now creating a property that looks like it's welcoming. It's a great place to live, right? It's, in some ways, assisted living should feel more like a college dorm, right, than it
Yes.
does, certainly than it would like a hospital. And so that's really what we're trying to achieve is people that are able to enjoy these years,
Yeah.
people that are able to, enjoy activities. And right, also, with the exception of people that are in memory care, which obviously are people with like dementia or Alzheimer's and things like that, where it's a danger for themselves, assisted living residents are typically able to come and go as they please. Right. And they can, and, some of our properties are in downtown areas. People can walk around, right? Or there's, travel to different stores and things like that. And so that's really a component that's also really helpful for people to get that, like, this should not seem like this is the end of my life and I'm just going here, like you said, like going here to die, right?
Yeah.
It should feel like a place that you're excited to go, that there's this new version of your life that you can achieve. And maybe instead of being at home for most of the day and kind of watching TV all the time, now you're around, 100 other people that are of a similar age and idea, and like you can have fun, you can play cards and tons of activities and all these things, and just sort of like, live life in a better way, in a lot of ways.
No, I love that. I love that. All right, last question, my friend.
Yeah.
So, if you can just leave one deed behind, one action, or even a mindset or lesson that you've learned throughout this journey that you went down, what would that be?
I think that everything in this space is better through transparency and through people having more knowledge. And so the more that, when prospective residents or their families, the more that people can understand about themselves, about what their needs are earlier on, both in terms of what they're looking for from a living perspective, what their financial capabilities are, and then the same thing for properties, right? It never aligns anybody to take on a resident that has a higher level of care than should be accepted. It doesn't even help if maybe they're at a much lower level of care than a lot of the residents, because maybe they won't, they'll feel like they're in the wrong place. And
Mhm.
so through that sort of transparency and honesty and everyone kind of being much more on the same page of not just trying to like find a place to live or find a new resident to bring in, but finding like the right place to live and the right residents to bring in, I think it would solve a lot of the issues that people see and make things a lot more seamless of a transition and allow for people to hopefully stay for a lot longer and decrease, moving around and those kind of things so much more.
Love that. I love the transparency part that you said on there. I definitely, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Doug, man, thank you so much for being on the show. You definitely, I got a lot of insights when it comes to the assisted living facility. So thank you for being an expert and educating not only myself, but also our listeners as well.
No, thank you so much for having me on. It was a really it was a great time, and thanks so much.
Awesome. You don't have to lie. But anyways, all right, guys, just what? Anyways, guys, listen, this is Omar Andreasen, aka Mr. Deed. Want to thank everybody here for listening today. And we're also going to have all the contact details for Doug on the show notes. So make sure that you reach out to him if you have any questions whatsoever when it comes to the assisted living space. And please make sure that you like, follow, and pay attention as an episode comes out every Thursday of the Mr. Deed podcast show. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless.
This is Omar Andreasen signing off and reminding you that success in real estate and in life is built one deed at a time. Until next time, keep it real, stay sharp, and don't forget to give life a big whammo and keep moving forward.